Here's a stat that should keep every nonprofit leader up at night. For every 5 donations a nonprofit receives, 4 will never give again. So that means only 1 out of 5 are going to continue giving. Now, those people still care, but something happened between that thank you email and the next ask that did not fit well. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how can you turn a single act of generosity into really a lasting relationship. So my name is Dr. Randy Dirks. I'm the host of Funding Your Future Now podcast, and it's designed for presidents of nonprofits, fundraising executives, and leaders in the nonprofit world. And today my guest is Jeff Terpstra, and Jeff runs a marketing agency in the Grand Rapids area. He's been doing this for a very long time. So I'm just delighted to have Jeff here on the podcast. Jeff, why don't you just take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you so much, Randy. It's a privilege to be with you. Yeah, we're deeply passionate about nonprofits, and we're really a creative team. My background is design and illustration. We work in the creative realms of writing, video, photography, and design. Our passion draws from, can we use our creative skills for the benefit of creating long-term sustainable relationships for the nonprofits that we serve. Even though we're right-brain creative people and project managers, we deeply care about the ROI that it gives the nonprofit.
Well, what an important topic for us to deal today, because, nonprofit leaders, they believe in the cause. And sometimes the misconception, and maybe we'll chat a bit about this, is that you just put out the information and that's going to be enough. People will be captured by the data, by the stats. And as you said, you folks are a more creative right brain. But, to engage with people effectively, you really have to enter into the inner soul of somebody, if we want to put it that way, and capture their attention and their heart first. And if you don't do that, you're really like every other request that comes across people's email, their mail, their text message. We're just inundated. So I love what you're doing. It's critical. It's important. The nonprofit I've served at, I've been in nonprofit works for 27 years, and we've always benefited from exceptional marketing people. So I've got a couple questions for you. Here's the first one. So many nonprofits excel at acquiring that first-time donor, but they struggle, and this is where the tension comes, into turning them into long-term supporters, people that say, we love the organization, we want to continue to giving. So what would you say is the biggest mistake you see organizations make in those critical first 90 days from that first gift and then the first 3 months? What is it that maybe nonprofits aren't doing that they could be doing better?
Well, I think most nonprofits are smart enough to know that you should get that response of thank you out within 48 hours. And then you need to have a donor stewardship plan in place that is both digital and personal. My wife and I, during COVID, did a test where we donated for the first time, because we had nothing else to do during COVID.
There you go. Might as well give to somebody.
We donated for the first time to 3 nonprofits, and we were just kind of curious on what their responses were going to be.
Great.
And it was varied from total ignoring us practically to personal phone calls. Obviously, the more personal you can make that, the more impact it has on that donor feeling and believing that their gift means something to that nonprofit. What we have pursued is really a deep understanding to how do you create a messaging system or understanding of how to create messaging for a nonprofit that will attract and engage donors and help retain them. And, my background, like I said, is more in the creative design film space. And my son is in feature films. He's done a ton of films with Marvel and other, big time films out of Atlanta and stuff. And we've talked many times, why is Steven Spielberg make over $10 billion in his films and other films don't do so well? And it's really the creative genius behind that of someone who's applying the creative understanding within that discipline of photography, video, writing, or design, and combining the artistic genius with technical knowledge. And it all seems kind of mumbo jumbo when I just shared that, but we kind of pursued that harder and we thought, what can we learn outside of nonprofits from other corporations, Hollywood, social change agents that can really guide us as a nonprofit in how we craft our messaging? So we discovered 3 areas that are critically important.
And what are they? I'd love to hear what they are, because I think here is what I could call maybe what is missed sometimes. There is a process. I think you talked about a process. And if that can be clearly understood and applied, that'll answer the question here. So go ahead and share those with us.
All right. I wanna touch on the process, and then I'll share the
Yeah,
3 areas.
please do.
I love that you pointed it to the process. You know, our tagline as an agency is "Your passion is our inspiration," and that is because that we believe that anyone who's involved in creating messaging for that nonprofit must truly have a passionate heart for that nonprofit. In other words, the passion that drives that nonprofit must enter my heart before I can truly do the creative work necessary. So how do I bring that passion into my heart? What we discovered was that we first of all need to learn to get to know the nonprofit well. So when we first engage, we have one-on-one interviews with stakeholder groups, you know, samples from donors and volunteers, staff, clients, foundations, partners,
Oh,
and we get to know the nonprofit from within. And those personal one-on-one interviews, they become gold.
mhm.
Things that are shared in those interviews really become the messaging ultimately of that nonprofit because it's in their own words. Also, if I'm thinking about writing, I want to write something that resonates with a donor. I want to write something that resonates with a client who needs my services. Well, if I've interviewed those people in person, I'm going to deeply understand their perspective and their language. So that's the first thing that we do are those one-on-one interviews. We might supplement that like with a brand audit of evaluating the nonprofit, how well they're doing their communications. Then we look outside to best in class and competition, and then societal attitudes and perceptions of that nonprofit's mission. And we're looking at each areas of those, and all together, we're gathering these insights that are going to lead us into 3 areas of messaging. First of all, we want the nonprofit to attract with their heart. And, you know, I'm an old guy, so I've been studying advertising and marketing since the 1980s. And
Cool.
still, my favorite campaign is Just Do It from Nike. And it's very fascinating because here you have a corporation, obviously driven by market share. They're going back and forth with Adidas, just, you know, one after another had 40, then 60, 60, then 40. And Nike had this idea of let's not sell a shoe, let's sell an idea, let's sell a belief. And when they came out with Just Do It, they had this wonderful 30-second TV spot of a gentleman jogging across a Golden Gate Bridge. He was 80 years old. And it's really funny because he talks about people ask me if my teeth chatter when I run in the cold. And he says, no, because I leave them in my locker. And that beautiful 30-second spot, what I love about it is that they didn't use a Michael Jordan. They used an everyday person.
So true.
Dozens of ads that were around ordinary people. Well, if a corporation can go from $900,000 in sales to $9 billion over 5 years with 70% of the people buying their shoes based off uniting and connecting with a belief, my goodness, of all people, nonprofits should follow that lead, right?
Yeah.
We should, of course, lead with our belief. Our belief is what has driven us to do what we're doing to begin with. So that's the first thing, attract with your heart. Secondly, have empathy for your hero. Well, everyone talks about storytelling. Everyone talks about you must tell a story. But the critical thing is, how do we tell the story? That's the critical. What is the narrative? What is the framework of that story that's going to guide us and really having people's hearts be attracted to who we're talking about? And first of all, I want our nonprofits to understand who the hero is. I was speaking to a nonprofit, about 20 staff. I was talking to them about the hero's journey, and I asked them who the hero was, and they gasped when I told them, "You are not the hero."
Okay.
They thought they were rescuing and saving the day, so they were the hero.
For sure.
No, your hero is those you serve.
Yes.
And the hero's journey, I found so fascinating as I discovered this and studied this in depth. The hero's journey is a hero's narrative that has been around for millennial in Greek literature, the Bible,
Yeah.
Shakespeare. the novels that we read, the movies that we love, like Gladiator, all these, You Got Mail, no matter what the movie is, it often has that framework, at least the bestsellers do. And so there's the hero was a person going on the path of life, and an adventure comes their way, often without their will, without them wanting it. So, for example, a mother is thrown into homelessness, obviously never expecting that that would happen to her. So she has to decide if she's going to accept the call of adventure as she has to leave that apartment. Is she going to continue to care for her kids? And of course she's going to. She can't negate that call. It's in her life. She can't give up on that call. She has to give it all she has. But in that journey, she faces so many different situations that are just a dead end. She might call relatives, and she can't stay there. She might try to find apartments or go to some other nonprofit, and just nothing is happening. So she continues to live in her car and trying to protect her children. And it isn't until she hears about Family Promise, for example, which is a nonprofit who helps homeless families, when she's kind of at the end of herself. And that's the whole idea of the hero's journey, is that they're fighting battles that they cannot win on their own. They need a guide, they need a mentor, need someone to provide insight or resources or relationships that will help them win the day. And with that guide coming into their life is not only an external change of finding an apartment and helping support them and doing all the wonderful things, for example, that Family Promise does, so that her life can return back to normal, but there's also an internal transformation that happens that is just as vital, that we need to tell of that internal transformation so that our audience can grow empathy toward that person. So when you tell the hero's journey well and use that narrative, it's super powerful and it transcends all generations and all cultures. The third area that we discovered was when we looked at social change agents and those who desired to bring change to society, what they did is they shared their dream of what society should be. So we tell our clients, when you're talking about your capital campaign, where you're talking about your initiatives and your programs and services, share with them the dream that these programs and services or the campaign accomplishes. Because everyone wants to, share with us what they do, but if it's shared within the context of your dream, that's when it becomes really powerful. And years ago, I came across Charity Water, and
Yes.
I just captured their homepage because within 2 sentences, they shared this beautiful dream that someday the world would be filled with everyone would have access to clean water, and you can join in that dream. So those are the 3 areas.
Wow. This has been a download of exceptionally great insight, and I could talk about a number of things I won't, but I'm gonna just highlight one thing about who is the hero in the story. And when you look at it from the standpoint of it's your donor, to be able to say, what is as you've articulated, what is the problem the donor has? Well, the donor, I believe, wants to be a generous person, wants to make a difference in the lives of people. They don't sometimes know how to do that. There's this desire within them. And so then the nonprofit comes along, as you noted, as the guide to say, here is how, in collaboration with you as the
Yeah,
donor, we can create a story, like you just articulated, that solves deep longing within you and then also makes a significant difference in the world. So you articulated that so well, Jeff. Thank you for that.
you're welcome.
So let me ask another question. It's the multi-channel integration. I think you alluded to this a little bit. When you think of uh, communications with donor, obviously there's email, there's mail, there's video, there's text messages. So there's many channels that are out there, and sometimes those can become separate channels. They don't work together well. So can you share an example of how a nonprofit can create what we'll call a cohesive donor experience across these different touch points, especially when you have a major donor or a major financial partner you're working with? What does it look like to have a cohesive process of using these different channels to connect with people?
Well, first of all, my answer is going to sound really obvious and simple, but it truly is. Start talking with each other. Let's bring the marketing and development team together and even programs together and start having monthly meetings together. Like, I always love to find out from the major donor officer, what are your donors saying? Why are they giving? What is the language they're using? What motivates them to give? what transformation do they want to see happening in society? So we get their perspective. And then from the programs people, obviously, they are the ones who are going to be helping us collect the stories. And then if they're aware of what donors are thinking, they can also be more aware of what stories to collect. And then also that obviously impacts all the different assets that you're creating for marketing within your marketing calendar, the newsletter, e-news, yeah, everything you mentioned, the appeals, annual report. Obviously, those are all fed by those stories, but then it also will impact. Let me back up a little bit. So we sit down with our client. One of our clients is a partner with us. We truly have sat down with the executive director, the VP of development, VP of marketing, and the programs officers, people who manage CRM and the website. And we truly are connecting regularly and conversing and developing a communications plan together. And when you're unified, that's when beauty starts happening.
For sure.
It's just such a joy. And then the other thing that we do within that is we try to find out if there's any gaps.
Yeah.
Like a simple example is like VP of development of the client I'm thinking of. We were trying to really strategize on using his time well, of maybe giving him 20% of his time to meet with new people.
Mhm.
We wanted to, dig deep and really make an initiative to develop new donors, not only steward those we had, but develop new donors. Well, we first had to find out whether he enjoyed meeting with new donors.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Because some people are good at that and some people aren't. Some
Very
people just
true.
love to steward, right? But he does love meeting with new people. So we said, great. What do you think about your stewardship? He said, I love following through and showing love to my donors. Okay, that's great. What do you think about bringing in that, kind of that information into the CRM? Oh, I'm horrible at that.
Yeah,
So we needed to provide support for him. That's all he needed was support
for sure.
because we weren't gathering those names. And it's such some simple thing,
Yeah.
but it makes a profound difference over time when those gaps are filled in.
So true. I've been impressed with how your process works. We talked about process a little earlier. You mentioned going to boards, going to team members. Before you start on a journey, you're really wanting to understand, and you do that by communicating with all the stakeholders. Now, when it comes to this whole matter of messaging, and you're going to the stakeholders again, you're going to the donors this time, seeking to understand from them. And I think particularly when it comes to people who've been long-term consistent donors, they want to share their story with the
Yeah.
organization. What is it that resonated with them? And what resonated with them, I know there's different age, generational things that changes from group to group. But when you catch that, what resonates, that is what you can really build on. So I appreciate how you're putting this so well together. Next question is measuring what matters, and the fundraising world where we're about measurements and trying to understand beyond the obvious measurements like donor amounts and donor engagement. What would you say would be an area that nonprofit leaders should be tracking about metrics and measuring, but sometimes they overlook it? And let's start with that. I've got a follow-up question.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but often we do A/B testing on our emails, for example.
Yes.
And we want to make sure our headlines are as meaningful as they can be. The other things are like doing surveys of your donors to ask them how satisfied they are. Are we communicating well? Are we communicating the way you want us to communicate with? If they're throwing all their direct mail in the trash, then we might not send that anymore. If
Right.
they're ignoring their emails, then maybe that's something that they don't want to have in communication. But obviously, we care deeply about the measurements that are obvious. I'm not sure how to answer your question besides, whether that appeal performs better this year than the previous year, or whether that event does better this year than last year. Why is that? Understanding why that is. And donor retention is huge. And that's where we have found when you follow those three areas of
Mhm.
messaging that we had just talked about, that you do have high donor retention because you're making that strong emotional connection. I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your question very
Well,
well.
yeah, you really did. You did well. What I was thinking of is you need feedback, I think is
Yeah,
one of the tools. And that feedback should first of all come from the people who are giving, just to make sure to what degree are we addressing your concern? How
exactly.
important is it? How do you want us to communicate to you? Some people maybe don't want certain styles of communication. They prefer something else. And so if we keep sending the printed material to them when they say, don't do that, we don't need that, but we want this and we want a short story. We want a video, you know? So when you understand and when you can connect with people,
Yeah.
hearing from them, I think, and you alluded, you really stated that well. I think that's such a key area. So here's the last question. It's called the personal connection. With donor databases growing and budgets being stretched thin, how can fundraising executives maintain that personal, what we say is a meaningful connection with donors without burning out their teams, because that can happen, or sacrificing authenticity? So, how do you guide maintaining that personal relationship, which you've spoken about here already?
Well, without burning out their teams, that's a really, really great point. And I think part of that is just, and this is the hard part too, because there's such high expectations from the board or executive leadership on donor growth and meeting budgets. And sometimes I have to say, sometimes those expectations aren't always realistic,
For sure.
not always wise. I had a new development officer, her boss demanded that she brings in $1 million worth of new donors on her very first gig,
Oh
and
my
she
goodness.
raised over 500,000, and then she was fired.
Oh, gracious.
Huge mistake. She had just developed brand new relationships. So
Yeah.
I think part of that is a higher level responsibility for executive directors and board members to really be careful of the pressure that you put on your staff and really know how true fundraising happens. And it's not to say that you don't have to meet budget. Of course, we have to meet budget, but how is that done and how are those expectations managed? Like, for example, we know that new donor relationships might take 3 or 4 visits, for example. So just, yeah, that's the higher pressure from above that causes a lot of burnout if it's not realistic. The other thing is that I keep begging our nonprofits is, for example, on your year-end appeals, maybe you don't have time as a staff to thank everyone over the phone, but that's the time to bring in volunteers.
That's a good point.
Get volunteers engaged, build out your capacity. Don't put all that pressure on yourself. So the last phrase that you have on here is sacrificing authenticity. I've had long conversations with our clients. One happened last summer where they were trying to knock out, I believe it was about 8 or 10 posts a week on social. And then they wanted their executive team, especially their vice president of development, to post, I believe, 2 or 4 items on LinkedIn a week. But I did a brand audit of them, and their responses were really low.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I just checked out their latest post. They had 4 likes. And this is a nonprofit with 10,000 followers. Like, why is it that low? So at that time, I encouraged them, stop using AI so much. If it's a letter from the vice president, let it be a letter from the vice president.
For sure.
Maybe she can only do it once every 6 months instead of once a month.
For
Do it
sure.
up to 6 months. Less frequency with more genuineness and sincerity makes a much longer impact on donor retention. Donors can sense that. People know that if this is a fake, letter
For sure.
with someone's signature. So I believe in this with all my heart that be genuine, whatever you do. Maybe pull back on the amount of things that you're doing. Take a deep breath, do what we talked about, making sure your messaging is spot on, and being genuine and authentic is going to go a lot further than knocking out a bunch of content.
Yeah. You almost have to put yourself in the shoes of a donor. I mean, we're all donors. We're
We are.
giving to something.
Yeah.
And to just reflect back on that and say, how do I want how do I want to be treated? What kind of information do I want? How do I want people to interact with me? And then just say, well, why not do the same for other people rather than have some arbitrary metrics that maybe are very meaningless? Well, that's great. Well, I've got what I call the fast five questions at the end. They have nothing to do with marketing,
Oh,
but more you as a person. And here's the first question. What would you say is the best piece of professional advice you've ever received?
wow. That's a really tough question because there's been so many. I think it was from my father as a kid. When I got my first job at 16, he said, "Jeff, you're there for your employer." And when I was on my job, my employer said, "You're here for the customer." And if you can get in your mindset that yeah, for me, that was profound because it even affects us today, that I am here for others.
Yeah,
So that would be it.
that's good. That's simple but profound when you really think about it. Here's a second question. What's one daily habit you cannot live without?
Yeah, I think that that time in the morning of reflection and prayer and just, allowing God time in my heart, to guide my day and then it really becomes toward the end of that's when creativity really starts flowing as I begin to plan my day. I can't be creative when I'm at work and the moments when staff have 5 questions and I have business meeting after meeting,
Yeah.
that's all gets quenched out, as you know, and so if we don't afford ourselves some personal time, we're gonna be burned out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So true. Okay. Question number three. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self, for you and I, that's a few years ago,
Oh,
what would
man.
be one piece of advice you'd give to that young man?
Yeah, I would say, listen well before you speak. Get to know people before you judge. You know, I meet so many people, brother, that, I interviewed this guy who had been in prison for 29 years. And
Hmm.
if you had just told me, hey, I'm going to have you walk in the door and meet a ex felon, he did this and this crime, I would place a judgment on him. But in getting to know him as a person and listening, hearing his tragic story and seeing where his heart is at today, I mean, I'm thinking of a particular person
Yeah.
I interviewed for our client who helps people out of incarceration. And when I interviewed him, I literally was weeping at the end because I had cast so many judgments. So listen well.
Great advice. Question number four. What's a failure from your past that actually ended up setting you up for success?
Boy, I thought we had talked about this together, brother. Now I forget what I had shared with you.
Well, it's okay. Just it doesn't need to be major. It could just be
Okay.
something that you said, "Boy, if I had a chance to do that over again," and then what that led for you.
Yeah, I think losing a client, that kind of failure hits really deep.
And it
And
does.
but yet if you can use it to say, yeah, maybe all of it wasn't my fault, but the areas that were, how can I serve my clients even better and become smarter? I told our staff we always need to be lifelong learners and always becoming better and better at our crafts. Whether we're a writer, I read books on writing, like by Stein. Sol Stein has an amazing book on writing. I learned so much from him. Yeah, I feel like I'm always learning, and every time you read a book or you learn something, you think, I didn't know that I didn't know that.
Well, I can imagine in your industry, when you lose a client, that's a painful experience because you've invested, you got to know the person or the organization, and but then to say, "What am I going to learn from this? What do I take forward?" is the great lesson. Here's the last question: What's your favorite place on earth to disconnect and recharge?
My art studio.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I painted from time I was 10 years old through college, and then I lost painting through my career because we were designers and marketers and all of that, and I find the greatest joy just to paint again, paint landscapes and, create beauty again with a paintbrush is something I find a lot of joy in.
that's great. I love it. Well, Jeff, I know we could go on longer because the marketing question, I think, is at the bullseye of impacting people with vision. Obviously, vision is critical. What is it we're doing? But then how are we going to communicate that message? So you've given us many good insights to think about. You've given me some insights I want to take back into my nonprofit world. So thank you so very much for taking the time. And just love for you to share with our audience a little bit of how people can connect with you. I know you're in the Grand Rapids area, but you serve clients nationwide. And so why don't you just share a little bit how people can contact you?
Our website is scottallencreative.com. Email us jeff@scottallencreative.com, and we have Passion Inspires as our own podcast, and yeah, just, check us out on our website and go from there.
Yeah. So that was scottallencreative.com. Well, that's exceptional. I love it. Well, thank you for listening in to this podcast today, to the people that are taking it in. Again, my name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding Your Future Now. I just welcome you back to gain value from this as we interview so many experts in their areas. So appreciate you being here.